There comes a quiet moment in almost everyone's life where a thought appears uninvited. I should have started earlier. Not loudly, not dramatically, just softly enough to stay. You see it when you look at other people's progress. You feel it when birthdays pass a little faster than they used to. You notice it when someone younger seems further ahead, or when someone your age looks like they've already figured things out. And suddenly, without anyone saying it out loud, you begin to believe something heavy, that it might be too late for you. Not too late in a dramatic sense, just too late to catch up. Too late to matter. Too late to start something new without looking foolish. And the strange thing is, this feeling doesn't come from logic. It comes from comparison, from silence, from the stories we tell ourselves when no one is watching. Today isn't about motivation. It isn't about pushing harder or believing blindly. It's about understanding why it feels too late and what quietly changes once you see that feeling for what it really is. Point 1. Why it feels too late. The comparison trap. The feeling of being too late rarely comes from your actual situation. It comes from comparison. Not comparison to reality, but comparison to a timeline that doesn't exist. You see other people's results, but not their uncertainty. Their milestones, but not their resets. Their confidence, but not the years they doubted themselves. Your mind fills in the gaps, and when it does, it assumes everyone else moved smoothly forward while you somehow paused. But that's not how life works. Progress doesn't move in straight lines, it loops, it stalls, it breaks and restarts. Yet your brain doesn't measure progress by depth, it measures it by visibility. So when you don't see your own growth clearly, and you see everyone else's highlights constantly, your mind reaches an easy conclusion. I missed my window, not because it's true, but because it feels emotionally efficient to believe it. And once that belief forms, it starts shaping decisions quietly. Point 2. The silent phase most people never see. There's a phase of growth that almost no one talks about, not because it's rare, but because it's invisible. This is the phase where effort doesn't look like progress yet, where learning hasn't turned into results, where change hasn't shown itself outwardly. It's the phase where you're thinking differently but not acting perfectly. You're practicing quietly. Without validation, you're becoming someone new before the world recognizes it. And this phase often lasts longer than expected. Long enough to make you question yourself. Long enough to wonder if you're wasting time. Long enough to think you started too late for it to matter. But here's the truth most people only see in hindsight. Almost every meaningful change begins with a long period of silence. The problem isn't that nothing is happening. The problem is that nothing is visible yet. And when you judge progress too early, you mistake incubation for failure. That's how people quit, not because they can't do it, but because they decided too soon that it was already over. Point 3. The real cost of believing it's too late. Believing it's too late doesn't just make you sad, it makes you passive. You stop starting things seriously. You delay decisions. You wait for clarity that never comes, not because you're lazy, but because trying feels emotionally risky. After all, if you believe you've already lost time, then effort starts to feel pointless. So instead, you observe, you plan endlessly. You tell yourself you'll begin once you feel more ready. But readiness rarely appears when belief is broken. What actually happens is quieter and more dangerous. Days pass, then months, then years. And the same thought that once whispered, I should have started earlier, returns later as something heavier. I wish I had started back then. The cost of believing it's too late is not failure. It's regret delayed. Point 4. What it's never too late actually means when people say it's never too late, it often sounds empty, like a slogan, like encouragement without substance. But the real meaning isn't that time doesn't matter. It's that direction matters more than timing. Starting later doesn't disqualify you. Starting with clarity often accelerates you. You're not beginning from zero, you're beginning with awareness, with perspective, with lessons you didn't have earlier. And while you can't reclaim past years, you can reclaim ownership of the next ones. Time will pass either way. The only real question is whether future you will say, I'm glad I started when I did, or I wish I had trusted myself sooner. You don't need urgency. You don't need pressure. You need permission. Point 5. The identity conflict that keeps you stuck. Here's something rarely acknowledged. When you consider starting again or starting late, it threatens an old identity. An identity that says, I should already be further. I'm supposed to have this figured out. I shouldn't be back at the beginning. So instead of starting imperfectly, you protect your ego by delaying. You tell yourself, I'll begin once I'm more certain. I'll start when it makes more sense. I'll wait until the timing feels right. But what you're really protecting is the version of yourself that doesn't want to look inexperienced. Growth often requires humility before confidence. And that discomfort is temporary, but avoidance can last for years. Point 6. Why starting later can actually be an advantage. Starting later is not the disadvantage people assume it is. When you start later, you bring self-awareness, emotional maturity, clearer boundaries. You're less driven by impulse and more by intention. You understand consequences better. You recognize patterns faster. You waste less energy trying to impress others. Earlier starters often learn through trial and error. Later starters often learn through insight. Both paths work, but one is not inferior to the other. Point 7. The question you should ask instead of, "Am I too late?" Instead of asking, "Am I too late?" ask something quieter and more useful. Am I willing to begin without certainty? Because certainty doesn't come before action. It comes from action. Most people who seem confident now were uncertain when they began. They didn't wait for clarity. They moved, and clarity followed. If you're waiting to feel ready, you may be waiting indefinitely. Readiness is often a side effect of starting. Point 8. What actually changes when you let go of the timeline? When you finally loosen your grip on the idea that you're late, something subtle begins to change inside you. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly. You stop treating every day like a test you're about to fail. You stop scanning your life for evidence that you're falling behind. You stop asking whether you're moving fast enough to justify continuing. And in that space, something healthier takes its place: attention. And when that happens, the question stops being, "Is it too late?" It becomes, "Am I moving in a direction I can stay with?" That's a much more powerful question, because the people who end up where they want to be are rarely the fastest. They're the ones who didn't quit simply because the clock made them anxious. They stayed, they adjusted, they kept going, even when progress felt quiet and unremarkable. Letting go of the timeline doesn't erase fear completely, but it removes the constant pressure that turns fear into paralysis. And once that pressure is gone, movement becomes possible again. If you've made it this far, there's a good chance this message touched something personal. Not because you lack discipline, not because you haven't tried hard enough, but because at some point, you started measuring your life against a clock you never chose. And when that happens, it's easy to confuse timing with worth. Here's something important to remember. Feeling late doesn't mean you failed. It means you became aware. And awareness is not the end of the road. It's usually the beginning of a more honest one. You don't need to rush to make up for anything. You don't need to force clarity or certainty. Most meaningful change doesn't arrive with confidence first. It arrives with a quiet decision to keep going, even while unsure. Time will move forward whether you act or not. That part is unavoidable. What is in your control is whether future you looks back and says, "I'm glad I started when I did," or "I wish I had trusted myself sooner." You don't need to fix everything at once. You don't need a perfect plan. Just choose a direction that feels honest, and take one small step without demanding proof that it will all work out. That step may not change your life overnight, but it changes who you become while time passes. And that matters more than most people realize. If this message resonated with you, take a moment before moving on. Let it settle, let it breathe. There will be another video like this coming next week. Until then, take care of yourself and keep going quietly.